Hi, everyone. Thank you for coming to our panel event, our virtual parent ed on giftedness and growth mindset. We're so glad you could join us. I'm going to briefly introduce our panel, but then I would love for them to introduce themselves. This is Dr. Lisa White of the Summit Center, Tonya Zimring of Thrive Baby Therapy. Thank you, Lina Fancy of LS Autism. And go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourselves.
Sure. I'm Lisa White. I'm a psychologist at Summit Center, where we specialize in gifted and twice exceptional people. I do neuropsych assessments. I consult with parents on raising gifted and twice exceptional kids, and I help families find the best schools for their kids.
I'm Tonya Zimring. I'm an occupational therapist, and I have worked with every age in different settings for about 20 years. And I currently work out of a clinic in San Anselmo, and then I also do work at schools like this one.
Hi, I'm Lina Fancy. I'm an autism consultant, as well as an AMFT working in trauma. I have been in autism since 1999, working with populations in school directly. That's one of the directors of the Autism Center in Northern California in the city. We did a lot of parent coaching. So in addition to that and educational consulting, I'm really trying to ensure that families are getting holistic support for their children who are neurodiverse.
And I'm Celeste, Ezell, head of school at Kronos Academy. And our school has a pretty different approach to learning. We're called Kronos Academy because we have every week is a unit study in a chronological timeline, and students discover and dig deep into history, science, math, art, a composer and an author, all kinds of topics. So we have a ton of content, and because of that, we attract gifted students who are looking for more in their education and really do well with more challenge, more content, more ideas to wrestle with. And we found, and this is the inspiration for this wonderful event, that our different approach can be such a transition for students coming in from other schools. And this is what we found, especially with gifted students. They're often used to finishing things quickly. They're used to tasks in the classroom being easy for them. Maybe they have some free time, when their classmates are still working. And here, we don't want them to run out of challenge. So here, they don't find that same situation. So when they're faced with these more significant challenges and that they're not as quick to finish and that they're not coming as easily, sometimes there's a little bit of a crisis in that they wonder if they're as smart as people say they were, or if they're as smart as they thought. And so we found equating being intelligent or being gifted with things coming easy, which is such a shame. We want them to equate giftedness with being hardworking and really taking on challenges. And sometimes they shy away from those challenges, say that they don't want to do something or don't like it. And we have seen some really significant transitions, but want your help. And so I've invited all of you here in our school into our classroom to give us more insights of what we can do at school, what parents can do at home, how we can instill a growth mindset in these students so that they are really going for it, So, so let's start with our first questions, or our first topic is let's explain what fixed mindset is, so that we can really understand that, and then we'll talk about growth mindset in a little bit. So I know Lisa had a really great definition of what a fixed or what, well, actually, before we even do that, there are different intelligences. We wanted to sort of set that up too. In defining giftedness, we know that some students are gifted in some areas and some are more average in others. And so let's explain that first, and then we'll go into our fixed mindset.
So some gifted kids, I mean, you can be gifted in a wide variety of areas. You know, you can be gifted intellectually, you can be gifted academically, you can be gifted musically, you can be gifted, I mean, there's tons of different ways to be gifted. Most of the time when people say gifted, they mean intellectually or academically. That's sort of the typical thing that people mean. And then there are the kids who are 2E, which are kids who are both gifted and have what I like to call like a bonus track. So they're gifted and they also have another kind of diagnosis. And this could be dyslexia, could be autism, it could be a hearing impairment, it could be ADHD, it could be kind of any other sort of situation that gives them a big difference between their strengths and their challenges. It gives them a very asynchronous or spiky profile. And I just like to say that when you're 2E, everything is either too easy or too hard.
Yeah. Okay, that's great. And we have dealt with a lot of those students. And so in those areas where they're gifted or where they are not, it's important for them to identify their mindsets and really understand how to grow in all of those areas. So, okay, let's define then a fixed mindset. And, I've seen it as, kids shying away from challenge, or even identifying themselves as not good at a particular thing. Go ahead. Maybe Tonya, you speak into it.
As an occupational therapist, I come at things in a slightly different lens, and I think of it as less of a cognitive thing of I think I'm not good at this, and more of a embodied thing around when I get stressed, I can go into physiological distress and have stress hormones. When I have sensory things, I get more fixed in my mindset. So I really look at it as a physiological thing. Like I see them going into fight, flight, or freeze very often, and I see that as a, they go into real distress. And once you go into those modes, it's really hard to think. You can't access your cognitive brain. And so it's pretty hard to get through whatever they're trying to get through when they've disconnected that part of their brain.
And I would just add on to that, I really look at a fixed mindset in regards to the difficulty of being able to modulate, the difficulty in being able to adapt, the difficulty in being flexible, right? There is a certain expectation. There is a black and white thinking. If something doesn't fit into that, let's say, preconceived notion of intelligence or preconceived notion of, well, I should be able to do this, the difficulty in adapting self-expectations can lead to some of that nervous system response and flooding.
And I think also, you're going to hear me say resilience like 100 times tonight, but I feel like kids who have a fixed mindset feel hopeless in the face of adversity. They give up when things get tough. They avoid challenges, and they're just stuck in place. And they just,
it's almost like a freeze response.
It is. It's just what Tonya was talking about, this sort of freeze response.
Yeah. Fear paralysis. Freeze response.
Well, and you said rigid thinking or black and white thinking. Do you want to expand on that?
Yeah, I mean, I can actually go into the next question if we're ready in terms of what problems it could lead to. So much of what has already been said when we see children who have large discrepancies of skills. So, we use the term sometimes splinter skills, right? So, as Lisa was saying, you have some children who are really great in some areas and other areas which need a lot more facilitation or scaffolding. I feel like that discrepancy is very difficult for especially young children to understand, right? And with that difficulty, we have then issues that come up about frustration tolerance. We have issues that come up, it's almost the same, but distress tolerance. When I'm working with kids, I call it stress tolerance. In fact, I had somebody come in yesterday, who has a lot of difficulty waiting. And just waiting creates a stress response. So the exercise we did to like for exposure and for her to be able to develop the resilience of being able to understand her stress response and be able to get some grounding around it was that I had a preferred item that I hid in the room, and there was a set amount of time on a timer, and she couldn't start looking until the timer started. But I didn't tell her how long the timer was on for. Now, of course, it was fairly easy and it was fairly quick, but I was just having her pay attention to how she felt in that moment. Because for somebody who is gifted and perhaps 2E, she basically attacks everything very, very quickly and doesn't have the social emotional ability to stay grounded in something and wait and hold herself before she acts. So it's a little bit of that impulsivity piece. Now, her distress tolerance has typically been very high, but talking to her about it and having her understand that she can likely do the activity super, super quickly, immediately. But her having to learn how to wait is just as important and to be comfortable with the discomfort. So when we're looking at that modulation piece, being flexible, being adaptable, stuff that we typically don't see for a lot of children who have a fixed mindset, all that skill development in distress tolerance is so incredibly important. I can go.
Yeah.
The social emotional pieces around that ability to stay emotionally regulated, and I'm doing social emotional work and executive functioning because it's all interconnected, and exactly what you're talking about, that ability to shift your focus, to be able to have that impulse control. And I think that one of the more interesting things about executive functioning is we often think of the keeping your stuff organized, planning those parts. They're actually categorized in two areas. Cold executive functioning are those more organizational pieces, and then hot executive functioning is this emotional regulation, this ability to keep it together. And so oftentimes if you have kids with a fixed mindset, they probably would show up as having executive functioning issues in the hot category.
I can add, just feeling, just bouncing back. Kids who have a fixed mindset have a harder time bouncing back, and that could be bouncing back from, a low grade on a test, or having a hard time learning something. But it could be bouncing back from having a hard time in sports. It could be bouncing back from a fight with a friend. It could be bouncing back from, a challenge with a parent. It just this bouncing back is a really good life skill, and kids with a fixed mindset have a hard time bouncing back.
Yeah. And I've noticed a perfectionism emerge, I think, and maybe you'll touch on this, but that they, here at our school, they want to finish their work quickly because they're used to that. And so they rush through it and want to be first, maybe you're over competitive and constantly you're comparing to other students. Maybe even argumentative with their teachers about corrections because they think that they did a good enough job, and if school avoidance is an issue, we don't see as much of that. A lot of our students are recovering from some school avoidance issues and having conflicts with teachers that makes them want to just avoid the situation altogether. Anything else about fixed mindset?
So can I just expand on sometimes what we see coming out of a fixed mindset, and also maybe the origins of a fixed mindset, because I think that's so important in how we are treating it, facilitating for children or individuals who have that, is that when we look at rigid or control-based behaviors, very often that is coming from that emotional dysregulation, aka anxiety. Right. Also, when we think about, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but also when we look at, let's say, children who are neurodiverse or children who have sensory processing sensitivities that can lead right into that amygdala response. I do remember reading a research article that did actually tie in higher sensory processing awareness for children who are gifted as well, stating that there might be a sensitivity in that realm also. So when we think about that, and when we think about people who are aware and taking in their environment at, let's say, a heightened level, there is a hypervigilance that can occur. And that hypervigilance, that overactive amygdala, what we call chronic irritability, which leads to dysregulation or anxiety, which consequently leads to rigidity or fixed thinking or control-based behaviors. All of this, like children are showing us just in their behavior and how they're coping, whether it's adaptive or maladaptive, they're showing us what they're experiencing. So when we see a child who, let's say, is perfectionistic or is rushing through work, okay, it can be focus, it could be attention, it could be fear of failure, it could be the anxiety that creeps in when they're trying to get something done out of fear of judgment, it could be a shame response. So being able to look at all these things and find out how to support and scaffold becomes so incredibly important. And of course, for each child, it's going to be different with different percentages and different splinter skills and different adaptive coping or maladaptive coping. But the most important thing is how do we get them to feel safe with themselves in the midst of splinter skills or being twice exceptional or being able to do things really quickly, but then socially or emotionally not being able to remain grounded in that. You know, that is what I think is so important, you know, in regards to what a fixed mindset could lead to.
Yeah. And I hear behavior problems at school and getting in trouble at school, all from that feeling unsafe and being
Yes.
unable to regulate.
Can I define feeling safe? Because I
Yeah.
think we often think of safe as physically safe. Like obviously kids are safe, they're usually safe at school, but from a neurological standpoint, it's felt safety, which is what's going on inside your body. Do you feel sick? What's going on outside your body? Is there something making you hypervigilant that's going on behind you? Is there something from your memory that you've had a bad experience with this before? Oh, I'm scared of dogs because I've been bit by a dog before. Your memory can be a big part of that. And so not feeling safe can come from a lot of different things, and it's not always actual physical safety.
Exactly. Okay, are we ready to define growth mindset, our big topic of the evening, and how to develop?
Go ahead. Oh, again, as an OT, it's a very embodied thing. We're looking at it from a sensory regulation standpoint. We're looking at it from motor learning. We're looking at it from executive functioning, and then your ability to participate in what you're needing to participate in. And so a growth mindset is really about like building in that ability to say to yourself, like, you know, learning is hard, but I can do this. And there's a lot of that. Maybe that was not so much a definition.
Learning is a process.
Yeah, learning is a process. I think there's,
Yeah.
we're just as OTs always trying to get that just right challenge so that they can have that mindset that, yeah, I can do this. Like I can do hard things.
I could do anything.
I can do
if I
anything.
just work at it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, to use your word, for me, it's resilience. It's building resilience and understanding that it's the journey, not the destination. So for children who need to do this and this and have it done, obviously that is more challenging. So it's really kind of slowing down and being able to break things down into small chunks that can eventually lead to mastery. And I think, you know, we had talked about it before, but I love the word yet.
Yeah.
I can't do it yet.
Yeah.
So when I have a child who's like, I'm bad at that, I'm not good at that yet. So it's just being able to have the flexibility to understand that this experience does not define you. This experience is a journey in order to gain more skills to get there.
And I think part of that is accepting and learning from feedback, you know, being able to integrate feedback. I think part of that is realizing you're not just one thing. You know,
Yes.
you're not just a smart kid, or you're not just a sporty kid, or you're not, you know, you can be multiple things, and you can change from thing to thing over time. So sort of that flexibility of identity a little bit. And for some gifted kids, it's just they were just the smart kid, you know? And for some 2E kids, they're just sometimes the bad kid. You know, they've just been in trouble so many
Yeah.
times that they're the bad kid. And so I think a growth mindset can help them, you know, realize there's room to grow, there's room to change, and as they mature, they can move from one identity to another.
Well, and similarly, you know, everyone has, correct me if I'm wrong, I think I read that everyone has fixed and growth mindset. And some people are more fixed and some people are more growth, or in some areas we can be more fixed or more growth. And maybe the first step is us as adults, educators, parents, those investing in our kids, right? We can think about ourselves because we are their models. They're very intuitive. They're watching us. They're learning from us and copying what we do. But we can identify where we have fixed mindsets and growth, you know, where we're growing, but also in areas where we are kind of stuck.
And I think also, I'm just gonna jump on that, is, you know, really important to meet a child where they're at. Because there is a lot of neurology behind this. I wish I had Dr. Marco with us today.
I know.
But there is a lot of biology, you know, neurobiology around this, indicating things like, again, an overactive amygdala, or indicating issues with dopamine synthesis. So for children who can synthesize dopamine easily, their ability to get that dopamine on the journey, even if something is not complete or perfectionistic, you know, they're still getting it. For a lot of children who perhaps may have difficulty with that, they're not getting that dopamine until it's done, which is when they want to rush through it. So it's really, it is, I do believe, very much environmental. But I also think there are some, you know, characteristics within a child, which is, again, indicating where they are and just meeting them where they're at to be able to scaffold, let's say, their ability to get some more of that dopamine or regulation in that journey. How do we do that?
How do we get them that
How do we
dopamine in
get
the
that?
process?
How do we get them grounded in the process?
What are some strategies to instill a growth mindset?
I wanted to jump in on the neurobiology point because I can't overstate the impact of memory. Like the example of having been bitten by a dog and whether you feel safe around dogs. Like you're always pulling from your memory. So if you have a child who went to a school where they didn't feel safe and they had bad experiences, or you've had some really bad homework experiences with them, and then they're sitting there and they're pulling from everything that's going on right now, and they're pulling from their memory, you can really get in a loop with this fixed mindset from the perspective of, I'm pulling from it, and now I'm tense about it again, and now I'm having another bad experience. Now I'm confirming to myself, yes, I am bad at this. You know, and so helping kids get out of that loop and have disconfirming experiences, like how do we help them? And I don't always think you can talk them out of it. I don't always think that it's a cognitive thing, because we're really getting into a physiological state around that.
That's right.
Yeah.
Well, and what do you do if you can't talk to them? Please continue.
Oh, I would say that the biggest thing is co-regulating. And co-regulation looks like just being there, being able to affirm, yeah, this is really frustrating, or this comes up every time, it's so hard, you know, but not following that with, you'll get it soon, you know, because then they can get into an argument with you around, no, I told you I'm bad at this, right? So you just want to hold the space for them to just have those feelings. Like those feelings are hard, and they need to be able to sit with that without somebody trying to talk them out of it. And just being within range of you, they borrow from your nervous system. Co-regulation is like, if I were really sad right now, I could get a hug and that would help my nervous system. So if you can hold the space for them while they're doing something challenging and be in proximity, you can really, really help them have a new experience with it.
I just want to tell a story.
Yeah.
I was working with a little boy who was super 2E, super smart, had a bunch of other challenges, and clearly someone had tried to like push growth mindset on him so hard. And we were working on something that was really hard for him. And he stops and he looks at me and goes, and my brain doesn't grow every time I make a mistake. And it just made me think what you said about like when you're co-regulating, you don't want to be like, but you'll get it soon. Like clearly someone had been doing that. And this little boy. It's like, oh my gosh, you're right. Like,
And you think about it, like if you were really frustrated with something and then somebody like skipped over your feelings and immediately was like, it's okay, you'll blah blah blah. It's like it sort of glosses over and it's well intentioned, but it won't give them that disconfirming experience. And it's the other thing is it's contagious both ways, the nervous system. So if they get dysregulated, it can often dysregulate a parent or a teacher. And then you're co-dysregulating, which is not awesome. So if you have the option, that's when you walk away, take a minute. If you have another adult, have the most regulated adult be the one helping with whatever the frustrating task is, because it won't. Once you're in that fight flight mode, and then nobody can think straight, and it's not going to be. It's going to confirm their experience, and then they're going to have a new memory of that.
And then I'll just add in a couple more strategies that, I use almost priming or preempting. So, I work with a lot of children who have splinter skills and they can do certain things really well. Other things are very, very difficult for them. If I am constantly working on things that are difficult for them and not giving them respite, they are going to at some point hit a wall and become dysregulated because they're processing at such a high level. So very often I am ensuring that I'm interspersing something that carries like a heavy processing load for them. So something that might take more energy, something that might fatigue them, with something that they can do really well. Yeah. And I might go back and forth when I'm first working on that fixed mindset, the growth mindset piece of really allowing them to feel safe enough to not have to do everything well. I'm consciously modeling all the time mistakes or, oh my gosh, that took me like 5 years to learn. Oh my gosh, you should have seen me, and I laugh about it. I laugh at myself and I'm modeling to them, what happens when I make a mistake. Right. I'm also priming. So I have a little guy who I work with who is just wonderful. And he is very vulnerable to judgment, criticism, and shame. Again, he is lovely, but he is starting to personalize even things that are not directed to him. And of course, when he goes to school and he's playing games, if he loses, that's it for the day. The resilience, his ability to bounce back is just not there for him. So we flipped it. I talked to him about playing Trivial Pursuit. He's, 7.5 or 8. He's 8 now. And other 2 really hard games with his parents. I'm like, I want you to lose. You're probably going to, it's a really hard game. And this is just for people who are 21 and older. So I just want you to play for like half an hour. So they started doing this with 2 or 3 games at home, once or twice a week. I started doing it with him, until he started kind of laughing at himself because he's like, I don't even understand. I don't know, and it kind of broke a little bit of that rigidity he had around himself. We put some humor in, we started laughing about it, but it really took a while for him to let go of that shame response for something he couldn't do.
Can I ask that?
Mhm.
Similarly, I always recommend for parents to model making mistakes. If they're, oh my gosh, today I got lost, I went the wrong way, blah, 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 really model their own mistakes, but also playing games based on chance.
Yes.
So like Chutes and Ladders, or like Candyland, or like roll the dice and like, there's no skill involved.
Yeah.
You're just way back at the beginning because that's what the dice were, and there's nothing you can do, right? And games based on chance, or like Uno, or like, right? I think those can be really helpful in sort of breaking through some of that,
Yes.
like that tightness.
The first thing I do with like real youngins, like Six and Under, is the ogre game, the co-op game where it's ogre on the board versus me and the child. So the co-op game, so it's not either of us winning or losing, it's when you're losing against the board. It's very, very similar. But that's the first thing I introduce, that rigidity there. It's great.
I would be remiss as an OT if I didn't mention strategies around sensory,
Yeah.
because it's such a base thing of like that for that felt safety, like just knowing your own child's like, they're aggravated if there's background noise, then if you know they're going to be doing something challenging, don't have background noise. If you know that they have a trouble with fluorescent lights, just know their nervous system well enough to know, like, and build in. Some of it's preemptive. You can build it in before a challenging task where they get into a fixed mindset, like lots of movement or and then you can build stuff throughout an activity as well. And I would say things like, drinking through something cold through a straw, crunchy foods, chewing gum. It depends on them, right? Every single child has different sensory things that they seek and avoid, and like just being super aware of that and helping set them up for success is really helpful. It's really hard to have a growth mindset if your nervous system's on overdrive around other sensory things.
And then can I add, just for parents, we talked about this yesterday, to stop being a like lawnmower / curling parent. And by that, I mean lawnmower parents who just, get everything out of the way of their child, or curling parents, like that Olympic sport where they smooth the ice in front of the little thing, right?
Yeah.
So as a lawnmower or curling parent, you're smoothing and you're clearing the path so much for your child that they never experience hard things. And you want your child to experience hard things. And a lot of times parents of kids who have various challenges, 2E kids, you don't want your kid to experience more hard things than they've already experienced, because a 2E kid already experiences a lot of hard things. But you don't want to smooth the path so much for them that they don't learn how to be resilient, how to bounce back from hard things, how to learn to face a hard thing and say, yes, I can do this. I can do hard things. And as a parent, you want to pass along the message that you believe they can do hard things, not just that it's coming from within them, but they're looking to you as a parent. Like it's when a kid falls down on the playground and they look to their parent before they cry.
Yeah.
It's like the child is looking to you to see whether you think they can do it. And you want them to believe that you think that they can do it, and not just coming from within them, I can do hard things, but also my parent thinks I can do hard things. So don't push everything out of the way so much that there are no hard things for them to do.
Yeah, it's that tricky balance, right? That like just right challenge. Like you want to scaffold enough that they're not set up to fail,
right?
But you don't want to do it so much that they,
right.
And with something like sensory, teach them their own nervous system needs and have them advocate for, I can't have that music going right now, or, I want this kind of snack, not that kind of snack,
Yeah.
So they can advocate in the future for themselves.
And I'm going to jump on that because the just right, I love that. I love that term in so many different ways, but the just right expectation or just right challenge. I also, for parents, think just right is also acknowledging both where they can excel, and what parents need to do for the piece which is needing more facilitation. Very often, all of us do what we are really good at. We do what we're really good at,
Right.
and we recognize when our kids are doing what they're really good at, right? Because we want to praise them. Obviously, we're going to praise them when they're doing something really well. what I find, especially for children who have a big discrepancy developmentally, they can be academically or intellectually really advanced, especially in giftedness, and children who are quite exceptional. And they have areas which may be underdeveloped or, are just much younger in presentation. And so I think I had mentioned this when we had spoken previously, is that I have an older child who's in middle school who comes and sees me, and he is very bright. He is in ways so mature, um, in the way that he can carry himself, articulate, engage with people out in the community. I would call him like a little mayor type of communicator. Um, but there is uh, there is another part of his social emotional makeup which is very young, and so he needs safety because of the rigidity, because of his fixed mindset, because of his self expectation, which is very internal for him. He needs safety. For me, safety also rings of attachment. And I think leaning into the attachment piece for a child who has a large discrepancy, it's really important that you're leaning into both. Let's say chronologically, it might be 4 years apart. We might have a child who's 12, functioning like a 10 or 12-year-old academically, and it's a 4 or 5-year-old socially, emotionally. It's like parenting two different children. So finding that just right balance is so important, because both of these sides to your child needs that support. So that child, although incredibly smart and incredibly articulate, wants to come in and sit on the ground and play Hot Wheels. And we have a blast. And I can tell that it is satisfying a piece in him that needs a little bit more nurturing. And with that comes safety. And with safety comes flexibility and the ability to modulate. So his reactions or his views or his even internal thoughts of himself aren't so extreme.
That attachment is also important in the classroom.
Yes.
And we think of traditionally teachers are supposed to have some sort of power distance, above their students, but then that's the cost. The cost of that is that attachment. And learning this throughout my career teaching, it's been really, really eye-opening that children are able to perform better academically simply because they are attached to me and they know that I'm accepting them, that I care about them. Just having fun with them is so important as a teacher, to help them develop that kind of flexible thinking or respond to me at all. That's wonderful.
That's like that felt safety.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm in these classrooms and I see both Daniel and Celeste, and these kids have a total connection with them. And when they start to get dysregulated, I see them co-regulate with them, and it's really powerful. And I did a teacher training recently, and it was so great to be able to say, here's what you're doing and why it's so great versus you should try this. They are already doing it. I just wanted to reiterate why it was so powerful. And it's magic for a lot of these kids. And they are coming in from other school experiences where that was not the case.
Maybe nothing, right? And I was thinking of the lawnmower parents, so teachers too. Lawnmower teachers, right?
Yeah.
Our method here, our value set here is mastery. And so instead of having grade level standards that we expect them to achieve, that everyone across the class can achieve at that grade, we have mastery, which is maybe unreachable or maybe will take through 8th grade to achieve. And And our goal is for them to stretch as far as they can towards that mastery and keep working at it. And so how much more important is that attachment? Because it's so much more risky, right? To do something so much more challenging like that. And for these gifted kids, exactly what they need to be strengthening that intellectual muscle.
And I would say a lot of the 2E kids are often very verbally advanced.
Yeah.
And so I'll often try to use whatever their strengths are to help with, so I would say in this particular context, like being able to reframe through verbal, again, waiting until they're regulated, because you're not going to have a teachable moment when a child's dysregulated, but being able to reframe it and just be honest and say, yeah, when you're learning something hard, there is a stress feeling, and name it something, like fireworks in the brain or brain push-ups or something that sort of indicates, yeah, I get it. It is hard. You are going to feel something around that, like that feeling with math where you just can't quite get it. There's a sensation. And I think just making the implicit explicit, just name it something, a little silly that they can kind of attach to and help them work through that. And then, labeling the feeling around it, but then also trying to help them get a little bit, reframe it after the fact, if you can.
Yeah. I mean, as they're studying themselves.
Yeah.
Yeah, it just actually reminded me of a girl who came to see me, and her ability to articulate, she was having a lot of behaviors, a lot of these were manifesting physically, almost, we don't need to get into this today, but almost like a PDA response where that anxiety just shut down the ability to engage in anything except behaviorally, or, avoidance. And we got to a point of building up enough articulation around what she was feeling. And I don't know if it was just more communicative or interoceptive, like in her ability to be aware of it.
Right.
But once we were able to tap into that, she was able to identify that yucky feeling and where it was in her body. Once that was done, the ability to start framing what you can do in that moment and how to take a break in that moment. I think it was something in her fingers, if I'm not, or a heaviness. And we had something specific that she would just go get, and it would shift her brain. It allowed us to start building the resilience. Yeah.
I like the idea of parents modeling, talking about the sensation they have.
Yes.
It's like, because interoception is that detecting internal sensations like hunger, needing to go to the bathroom, am I cold, am I hot, do I feel sick? But also emotions all start as a physical sensation. So when kids don't have good interoception, they often don't detect their own emotions well, and then they don't detect other people's emotions well. Like it can really cascade. And so this piece around like there's a physical sensation to being like, oh, this is really hard. But if we have kids who are not really in touch with their body, and you can have these really smart kids become like walking heads. They're very cognitive, but they're losing touch with what's happening in here. And so parents to model that, like, I feel it here when I'm anxious, or I get a tight stomach. Like just talking about it, you're having it, but we don't really talk about it. But for kids who that might be challenging for them, hearing somebody else talk about what's going on, it could be helpful.
And I really think that understanding, with just hearing it and understanding it and being able to identify it, for so many kids, this feeling almost sneaks up on them, which leads to that 0 to 100 in terms of reactivity. So being able to actually identify something early on, maybe in the 20s or 30s, allows that little bit of space to get in there and regulate before going, right? Just that emotional response because they just got flooded so quickly. And perhaps they weren't picking up on the cues, or, didn't have the skills to identify what was happening within them to pick up on.
I do find the kids with the issues with interoception are often the ones that blame everything outside because they can't figure out what's going on inside. So it's your fault. that stupid paper, pencil doesn't work,
Yeah,
whatever.
yeah.
It's like, it's always externalized.
Yeah.
But it's a clue, right? Like, I think all behaviors make sense. We may not know what they mean, but
Right.
they're all telling us something. They're all
They are.
clues. And so when you hear that type of thing, you might check, like, wonder how their interoception is. We know kids all the time who don't detect hunger or have had issues with going to the bathroom because they didn't detect it. Well, that will then translate into emotions.
Yeah. And that leads to a growth mindset, and that avoidance is what kind of keeps them stuck in that fixed mindset. Daniel has a.
I'm the host, Daniel. Hi, everybody. Off camera. There are some questions that are more general that might be saved toward the end, but there's a specific question to this topic
Okay.
that I thought I'd
Thank you.
bring from the audience. Tracking the embodied somatic experience often dysregulates my son. He calms down from intellectualization.
Yeah.
Is there a way to use the somatic for a kid like this, but avoid the anxiety it creates?
Ooh, that's tricky. I mean, I would say like that. Don't try to embody it in the moment that they're doing something else hard. It would be like you don't want to combine that with something else that they find challenging. Let them have their safety in the cognitive for whatever that task is, and then try to deal with the interoception at a separate time in a more gentle way. I don't. It would be like a fire hose if you tried to do it at the same time.
Debrief later.
Yeah, well, and there's like entire programs around working on your interoception. There's a notee named Kelly Mahler, and she does amazing work. And
I'm gonna put that in chat.
okay, Kelly Mahler, Mahler. Both Denise and I use her program in our practice. But yeah, sometimes it starts with like, what do your feet feel like? What do your hands feel like? And
that are neutral, not gonna.
Yeah, and then we slowly build up. But I've certainly like said to kids things like, how does it feel in your stomach when you're nervous? Mine feels tight. And they just look at me like I just said the weirdest. They were like, I don't know what you're talking about, lady, because they've never connected with that. And like, they just literally think I'm making something up, So, but there is actually ways to address it, but I would address it separately from when you're in something that gets them into a fixed mindset. And I do find that kids who it is uncomfortable if you've not been in touch with what's going on for you internally. When somebody, like kids are often somewhat resistant to going there because it feels so foreign, and so they're like the Mahler approach is very gentle, very slow, because it is often, it can make kids feel unsafe.
And I want to say that, not to blame parents, but sometimes parents of like, especially very gifted kids, they really focus on the intellectual. And it's almost this sort of head in a jar thing sometimes that ends up where so much focus is placed on the intellectual and the verbal and the this and that the body is just so low priority in so many ways. And that can trickle down to like hygiene, and that can trickle down to like wearing appropriate clothes for the weather. Like there are just so many ways in which the physical just sort of gets less important for some of these like the parents really focus on the intellectual, and I think just not even teaching their kids of like what it feels like in your body.
Yeah.
And I think it's probably because some of those parents don't
I was
it's just
gonna
like
say,
their body, right? These are highly gifted parents also who don't know what it feels like in their own bodies.
No, I have parents telling me all the time, I'll give them a listen, like talk about this, and they're like, yeah, I don't do that. I don't do that. And I'm like,
so I mean, maybe that's part of it too. That how can you do that as a parent if you don't know what it feels like yourself?
right. And again, I think these kids are smart enough that we can just explicitly teach it. And just really like, okay, this is the thing, like it might sound crazy, but yes, people feel something in their stomach when they're nervous.
And I was gonna say one starting exercise I sometimes do, and we might have done it, I think, here. I remember doing here. But for kids who are able to, and of course I will switch it to be developmentally appropriate. Like sometimes for younger kids, I make it more like a game. Like close your eyes, I'm gonna say like a body part and see if you can feel that body part and what it's doing. But like a guided, mindful journey down the body, and it's used for grounding, right? Where you're closing your eyes, you're like, okay, think about your head now. Imagine that energy going down to your shoulders. Now wiggle your shoulders. Okay, now feel your nose, like wiggle your nose. And I can see the kids who are really listening and feeling it. I sometimes use that as a starter exercise, just so they're able to focus in on different areas of the body and feel the sensation. Now, I'll do this with, if a child responds to it, I will do it repeatedly. So in the moment, if they are having an escalation and they can't be reached, sometimes I'll be like, okay, think about where your feet are right now. And it's just part of the priming of that repetitive, guided imagery or grounding that they become familiar with. And it's just a start to see like which ways can we interrupt the escalation, or in which ways can we get them to recognize those sensations. And that's a really fun one because it'll be like, where are you on the chair? Wiggle your hips, wiggle your toes, and you just kind of go up and down the body. It's a great mindfulness exercise you can do in class.
And for young children, I was going to touch on young children, or how young can you do that type of an exercise, or that body awareness.
And do know that for some kids that will be too hard.
Yes.
That will that will be a clue.
Yes.
And back off and,
Yeah.
and take it slower. Can you ask our person in question whether they felt like we answered the question?
Sure.
While you're doing that, just sort of a sweet story about interoception. A boy that I was working with who was maybe a ninth grader who asked me, how do you know when you like someone? Like someone, like romantically. And we talked about like how it feels in your body, like you get butterflies in your stomach, or like you might blush when you're around them, or when you're talking to them, or like, and it was he kind of couldn't attach yet to the intellectual part of like yeah, I like them, but I like my other friends too, right? But like we attach it to like how it feels in your body when you like someone. And so, right, it's not always like a stress situation.
No,
It can be sort of
I love
like
that.
a nice kind of thing to attach body feelings to as well.
And now imagine a child with interoception issues. That could be a real like tricky thing to understand as well, right?
Absolutely.
And how does that externalize? Yeah.
What other advice would you have for parents of young children, and who are just starting out? Maybe they're getting ready to go to school. We went to a kindergarten fair this past weekend and talked with some families who have 4-year-olds, or getting maybe even younger, thinking about kindergarten, to get them started off on the right foot as far as a growth mindset.
Like the younger they are, the easier, right? Like you can pepper in those things like yet and whatnot, and they have less memories of having a hard time, so they might be willing to accept that. So the earlier the better is probably my advice. Yeah.
I like breaking things down into really simple tasks. So if there's one thing they need to do, I like breaking it into like 5 different things that they can try to get to the final destination of the task or the game or whatever it is. So the reason why I like that is because I think it shows that sometimes you don't have to just go from point A to point B. Sometimes you're going to go over to X or sometimes to D and still get to the end, but in a different way. Or how many different ways can you get there? There's not only one way, right? So I'm just trying to open up the possibilities.
Okay. You have a question now, Daniel?
We've got 4 questions. We've got 5 minutes left in our time.
Okay.
If I can have you guys feel those. It may truncate some of your programming. Are we done at 7:30?
I think we're done at 7:30-ish.
If there's anything urgent or important that really needs to be covered prior to questions.
No, let's do it.
No, I think
Okay. I have a rather specific question. Are there any practical strategies to support an 8-year-old moderately gifted girl who isn't motivated to put forth her best effort at school or with homework? Suspected 2E for lack of focus or inattention, but might have more to do with stubbornness. So we could look at, us looking at the motivations of our children, might be a helpful topic. Are not being interested enough to do well at school. She puts her best effort to socialize and do everything else, but perform consistently well, everything else but perform consistently well at school. She's in a gifted school, which is one of the best in our state, and appropriately challenged. I'd love to get some practical strategies for working with her.
Let me take this. Yeah. Chewy girls are so my thing. Okay, so first of all, I want to say when parents say their kids aren't motivated, you're usually motivated, but just not toward the thing you want them to be motivated toward. So, like, let me just put that there. Second of all, I want to say that for 2E girls, like when it looks like they're not trying hard in school, or it looks like they're not, putting in the effort, it's probably because of something of the 2E part. Like kids, I mean, I don't remember who it is, they say kids do well when they can, but like, like, did it say how old this child is? 8. Okay. So 8-year-old girls generally are fairly motivated to do well in school. Like it's kind of a thing for 8-year-old girls to like do their schoolwork and like be liked by, want to be liked by the teacher and so on and so forth. Mm-hmm. And so if she's not having that experience, there's something going on. And if she hasn't had an evaluation, she needs an evaluation because is this dyslexia? Is this ADHD? Is this like, what is this that's keeping her from reaching her potential? So, because it doesn't fit, it doesn't fit the typical mold of very smart 8-year-old girl to not want to be doing well in school. I would say she probably can't be doing well in school for some reason or another. So that's what I would say for that. And I would say before you get into strategies to sort of like, you need to work harder at this, figure out why it's not happening already. And figure out what the roadblock is. And then once you know what the roadblock is, then you'll have the strategies to figure out how to get to the end point.
Yeah, when they mentioned attentional and whatnot, sometimes they need more reward system built in for the dopamine hits, and some kids with attentional issues need more of that than others. But I agree. Get us so you know what you're looking at.
And then, just to make it a little bit more complicated, I know that for some children who are gifted or have a 2E presentation, the reward systems in place aren't satiating enough. Because I think there are sometimes, just like you said, further issues that are going on that need to be, investigated. So yes, I mean, sometimes I see it's just, dysgraphia comes up a lot. Dysgraphia comes up a lot. So when a child is regulated, their ability to like take from what's happening internally and being able to write it down, both in organization and as well as fine motor, they can do it seamlessly. When they are overloaded, when their processing is not firing, the challenges and the difficulty of writing, which is what we do in school every day, it becomes a little bit of this roadblock, and it sometimes isn't really tracked or it's not even caught because at times they're able to do it no problem. So you don't automatically think that there's a challenge or a deficit, but dysgraphia, like sometimes that little one just slides in there and it can cause a lot of difficulty for children.
Do you want to be more specific about what type of testing you recommend?
Yeah, sure. That's a good idea. So what you want is a neuroeducational evaluation. And so that would probably include an IQ test and an academic achievement test, because you want to be able to, the IQ test doesn't have any academic skills on it. So it's sort of pure. And then you have academic skills and you can compare the academic skills to what is their cognitive potential. So let's say she has a really high verbal score, but which is no reading involved, but her reading scores are really low, then you say, okay, there's a disconnect there. There's something going on there that it shouldn't be like that. They should be more equivalent. So you want an IQ test, you want an academic achievement test, and then you want further testing in whatever the area of concern is. And when you have an intake session with a psychologist, you'll discuss your daughter more and sort of feel out what the areas of concern are. So those further tests might be for reading, they might be for math, they might be for attention and executive functioning, they might be for writing, they might be for fine motor skills. So whatever the further areas of concern are, you would have more testing for that. And it's a whole process. I mean, it's not like a one and done day. It's a number of hours of testing. But at the end, you should get a really in-depth report that explains all of what's going on, her strengths as well as her challenges, and gives you a lot of recommendations on how to kind of go forth. And I like to say we are in the business of making people's lives easier, and giving people sort of a handbook for their child.
I wish every child could get.
That is my dream.
Like my child got assessment.
Everybody gets an assessment.
She found out she was an auditory learner, and it was so helpful, and then she could advocate for herself, right?
That's right. I realized that I missed one little bit to provide context. She particularly has challenges with avoidance and task initiation. But I think you guys fielded that particular area very well. I have four more questions now. They're coming in. Hello. I have a gifted child who's in junior kindergarten, little one, and a teacher that could not handle his need for body movement. After 2 weeks of this having constant meltdowns and nightmares, I finally had a meeting with the teacher. I attended with a social worker who asked the teacher what she does when my son gets dysregulated. She laughed and said, nothing. And she explained that she would tie up my son on her chair, chain the chair to the desk, and leave the class so he was left crying all day. My jaw just dropped and I instantly withdrew him. But now going to any school, private, public, Catholic, nothing is working. The other kids set off his sensory issues or gets bullied and beaten up. I'm a single mom and homeschooling is hard because I need to work to support my son. I'm located in Canada. Just wondering what advice you might have for me.
So it's back to that memory thing, right? Now he's got like a trauma memory. You can touch him on this too. So he's got this thing that's going to come up, and how does he get that disconfirming experience to help form new memories that are not based on trauma? I'll let you go roll with this one.
That's right. So I would probably start with a small, intimate school with a teacher who he and mom can absolutely trust. Sorry, I don't know if it's mom or dad, it's a single parent.
That's enough.
Mom can absolutely trust. And I would start breaking the trauma memory pattern, which means that I would do almost like a little bit of exposure therapy for the first week, coming in for an hour with mom and the teacher if possible, and then kind of coming in for longer times and more frequent, so this child can build up both safety and a better memory when it comes to school.
I also wonder whether something like a forest school or like some kind of heavily outdoor program or something that's a little less like sitting in a classroom might be a good sort of intermediary between what he had and then the school he's going to go to for the next 11 years or whatever it is. Something sort of to break that.
And please tell me that teacher is not a teacher anymore.
No.
I know.
So the last thing that I will say is that very often when I get called into cases that have a lot of providers, perhaps there's an external OT, perhaps there's an external therapist, there's a teacher's team. I'm often calling roundtable meetings at the beginning of the year. So, either the teacher or the private therapist or whatnot are hearing information because children can demonstrate different behaviors in different environments. And the more information the whole team has, the better. So hypothetically speaking, if the teacher is hearing from the OT about sensory processing and some of the sensory processing strategies that this child might need, or the therapist is indicating like a peer response because of past trauma, the teacher can have the information and like the handbook, like you talked about, to be able to really help the child access their educational environment.
Thank you so much. I'm gonna mark that one done. Story's not over yet, that's for sure.
I know.
We have another question. Any advice for parents who really, really want the best to be the best parent we can be for these kids? It naturally creates anxiety having a 2E kid. Also creates anxiety. Our anxiety leads to our kids feeling more anxious, and then the cycle escalates. Any tips for our own therapy, self-care, meditation, etc.?
You're doing a good job just
Yeah,
asking the question.
There's a woman named Robin Gobble, and she wrote a book called Kids with Big Baffling Behaviors, and she has an awesome podcast as well. And she has a lot of tips for parents on how to work with their own nervous system and increase their window of tolerance and whatnot. And it's really great stuff. So I'd say that would be a good place to start.
That's Gobbel.
Gobbel.
Gobbel. Great spelling.
Also say that for a lot of parents who have young children who get a diagnosis, I believe there's almost like an immediate need to get therapy, intervention, an educational placement that works. It's cortisol driven. The parent is in high gear because they're hearing from everyone, early intervention, early therapy, brain plasticity, areas of development, and a parent is running at those early years trying to get that sorted out. I often see after a child is placed appropriately a little bit of a fall from parents because they finally have the space to let down. Sometimes the behaviors are such that they can't find that space. So I highly recommend therapy. And there are support groups. There are both support groups online. There's some support groups on social media. There are in-person support groups. Regional centers and other community organizations can host them. It is so incredibly important for parents to talk.
What are some keywords for searching up those support groups? Things that
I would probably search for, twice exceptional.
Parents is fine. Yeah.
Parents is twice exceptional. And I know that there's different ones. There's a lot of autism support groups. There is a fantastic DNDD support group, which I can share later. I can send you that information for parents who are experiencing a lot of behaviors at home. But, when we look at parents who have a child who's neurodiverse and with challenging behaviors, I did some research on this, and having a child who's having a lot of behaviors and a diagnosis is one of the most stressful presentations for a parent over any other psychological and physiological challenge or ailment. So this stress is real. So many times the parents who want to be the best parents are doing everything for their children, and they don't have the time or space to look after themselves. So really, really important that you find some way to carve that out for yourself, because that will help your child.
And I want to say that self-care does not mean going to the grocery store by yourself.
Right.
Right? I mean,
That's right.
time for yourself is time for yourself, not time in which you're still doing things for other people, but alone. Right? So whatever resources you have, put them toward giving you time away. If you have a spouse, time away with your spouse in which you talk about something other than your child is really nice. Time when you don't have to cook dinner for your picky child, like whatever you can do to take a load off yourself and honestly be out of your house and away from your child for some time is super important.
Yeah, it's very akin to caregiver fatigue. It's really similar. So yes, absolutely, just getting that time away just for yourself to get some grounding because you're working hard and probably all the time.
And they're borrowing from your nervous system, and that's
That's right.
exhausting.
That's right.
That's exhausting. And so knowing that they need that co-regulation, that self-care isn't just, like a spa day, but like the more you are able to nurture your own nervous system, the more you're going to be able to help theirs.
Put on your own oxygen mask first.
Yeah.
Right.
I have two more questions so far. We may cut it off at some time. It is 7:40, so you can decide. How can I support and advocate for my kindergarten son who is in a regular public school that does not have a gifted program and is having daily behavior issues because she claims he is bored? We know he's not stimulated intellectually, so is acting out, and then is struggling socially because of his behavior. He's already labeled himself as a mean kid with no friends, and others are mean to him as well. Would love your advice to help pull him out of this. Thank you so much.
So as somebody who helps parents find the right schools for their kids, if you have it in your means, you might want to consider a different school. Most public schools can't do it for gifted kids. Like they just can't do it. At least in California, at least definitely in the Bay Area, there are like 2 schools in the entire Bay Area with anything remotely resembling a gifted program. Like it just doesn't exist. I've like heard it exists in other places. The public schools just can't do it. And no matter how much you bang your head against the wall, you can't make a public school into a school for gifted kids. If you had it within your means, I would look for a school that was either a gifted school, like specifically a gifted school, or a gifted friendly school, where the school could differentiate a lot for your child, even if it wasn't technically a gifted school. Because, your child's in kindergarten, you still have time to make a difference. You still have time to change their view of school. You still have time to change their view of themselves, that they're not this like bad kid, that, they can have friends, they can, behave in a certain way. And likely they would have more friends if they were around kids who were more like them, which they're more likely to find in a gifted school or in a school with more gifted kids. So if it's at all possible to find something like that, I would highly recommend it. If you can't, you're going to definitely want to seek out gifted peers outside of school. It can be hard to find. If there are Facebook groups probably in your area for parents with gifted kids, and you may want to say, hi, I live here and I have a 6-year-old who's interested in Mars. Anything you want to meet up? And you do stuff like that. Because you want your child to have the experience of being around other kids who are intellectually advanced. And then with school, you do the best you can. You bring in harder books, you bring in math workbooks, you work with the teacher, you don't antagonize the teacher, you partner with the teacher. But you kind of resign yourself to knowing that you can't turn a public school into a school.
I would find out how the teacher's responding to the behaviors to make sure there's not a response that's making things worse. Yeah.
And you said, I think yesterday in our conversation, that gifted kids really need that challenge intellectually. And so if the school isn't giving it, seek an after school program, a chess club, D&D or whatever, something, a mentor, someone they can meet with, maybe a tutor, someone they can meet with regularly to give them that intellectual exercise, to keep them spurring on, right?
And if the child has a diagnosis in any way, they can get a 504 and they can get accommodations written in, and some of those accommodations could be providing. No,
They won't be, not in the Bay Area.
with the 504.
If they have another diagnosis, if they're
they won't put gifted stuff in a 504.
Yeah, that's the problem in California, right? There's no gifted, they've defunded the gifted programs, or they wrap them into the general school budget. And so schools don't legally have to accommodate for gifted students unless they have another diagnosis.
They could put accommodations in, like movement breaks or how they respond to a behavior or whatnot,
That's right.
So.
And then what I will say, So for, again, a lot of these children that we're seeing asynchronous development, socially, emotionally, let's say they aren't as developed as their intellectual skills. If they are going to school and they're not getting the intellectual input and they're having difficulty socially, emotionally, none of their strengths are being highlighted. So they're going where they're spending a lot of time at school, and not feeling like they're being recognized for anything that they can do. And that impacts their confidence. Then we start seeing a little bit of a shame, I'm bad, shame, negative feedback loop. And, that just kind of continues until
Thank you. Last question, and this is actually a really great one to end on. What are some practical applications to incorporate growth mindset in daily life? Everyone talks about it, but no applications or strategies are necessarily shared. When bright kids have not found their tribe, how do you keep them motivated, engaged in the ordinary? For example, a child says he has a growth mindset, it's not doing work because he finds it boring. So you end up with a lazy mindset. It's difficult to keep challenging the child in everything. That's the words on the page. What do you guys hear? How would you like to respond?
I don't know if you have to challenge everything they do, is my first response. I think pick and choose and maybe in an agreement with the child what things that they want to work on and give them some leeway in some of the other areas. I don't know. You guys are the experts though.
It makes me go back to this idea of like finding their tribe, finding the people that they can connect with. There's that book, The Dandelion and the Orchid, and it has a lot of really good research, but it talks about how even if it's the Pokemon club or the chess club or that whatever, if you can encourage a school to have some, and then those are their people,
Or start a club.
Yeah. So I think it's really, really important for kids and for them to have felt safety at school, to have their people. And that often comes in the shape of clubs when kids are a little bit have different interests than other kids.
I would say it's not uncommon that gifted kids don't want to do the work as the teacher has given it. And we think of gifted kids as divergent thinkers, not necessarily some are neurodivergent, but not necessarily neurodivergent, and that they want to pave a new way. Absolutely. They want to trailblaze. And so if everybody's doing the assignment, they're going to want to do something else, by nature. And if you were going to say something, go ahead.
So when I run into that, not wanting to do something, I immediately will shift into attachment mode. So I will attach into something that they want to do and get that connection and then throw the assignment in there. As like, okay, now my turn for 5 minutes. Can you just do this? I know you can do this in 5 minutes. Let's just do this and we'll continue this. Right? So it's a little bit about, I have a choice whether to challenge or argue in that moment to complete something, or shift gears, connect on a different level, and then bring the work into that space.
I say connection before correction.
Connection before correction.
Yeah,
I love that.
Yeah, I need another word in there now for yours, because it's not just correction, but like filling in the assignment.
Yeah.
I would say also a lot of times gifted and TUI kids need to know why, and if there's an assignment, they need to know why it's important and why they have to do it. And a lot of times teachers don't want to give a why. Like teachers in sort of traditional schools don't want to give a why, and the answer is because this is the assignment.
Right.
And maybe working with your child to discover some of the why things are important to do. And sometimes things are important to do because that's what gets you to the next level, right? Like you got to do the easy math because the easy math teaches you the basics so you can get to the more interesting math, or whatever it is. But figuring out the why sometimes is very helpful for gifted kids.
Any others? right.
Any other questions?
Thank you all for all of your advice, all of your insights. This was so valuable. This time is really, really helpful to me, but also to our audience, our teachers, our parents. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And we'll be sharing some resources with you. I think there's a web page already set up. So thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody, for coming on.
Have a good night.
Thank you.